Hello again, folks, and welcome back to the shop. We're in week 2 of 2022, which is January 10th to January 16th. And we're going to start by putting some stuff away, just cleaning up the shop. That right there is my new air conditioning unit and air conditioning and heater box. So I had it in the car just to check and make sure it was going to fit. Obviously I didn't do that on camera, so we're just going to put that box away and we are going to get started on this nice big Tremec box. This is pretty exciting. In the last video you saw me kind of cutting out the mid plate and getting the scatter shield ready and getting the engine mounts cut off of the cross member. So now we've got a transmission. This is a T56 6-speed manual transmission, and we are going to get this fitted in. Right now I'm taking a look at the box. In shipping, obviously the packaging kind of went everywhere and disintegrated. The input shaft was sticking out the end of the box. It's in there all twisted. The output shaft was kind of pushed into the back of the box. And when you open up a brand new expensive part like this, it's the last thing you want to see. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking a bunch of pictures and documenting everything so that if I run into any problems at all, I have it all documented. So I just want to get this on the bench, and it's not the heaviest transmission, but it is about 135 pounds dry, so it takes a fair amount of effort to get it out of the box and onto the bench. Again, I'm just documenting everything that's gone on with it. There's cardboard stuck in the output shaft, the input shaft had some cardboard on it. Yeah, just documenting everything. Yeah, so I don't know why I did this, but I felt like reconstructing what the packaging should have looked like when it arrived and getting the transmission back in there. I mean, there's really no benefit or value in doing that other than, hey, this is what it was supposed to look like when it arrived, and it came all janked up. Again, that's a 135 pound transmission, so it's pretty heavy. Getting it back onto the floor, I didn't drop it, but it wasn't as controlled of a lowering as I would have liked. So at this point in time, I really didn't know where to go with this. I didn't know how to check the transmission for damage. So what I'm doing is I'm probably texting a guy I know and just saying like, hey, you know, I got this tranny, here's some of the pictures, this is what it showed up as, you know, what do I do? Yeah, there I am, just thinking to myself, well, all my plans for getting this all mated up and in the car are shot because I'm probably going to have to send this thing back. And so I'm just like, what do I do? Well, I'll look at stuff and ponder and not really have any answers. By spinning it around, I can actually start thinking about mating it up to the transmission. Obviously, with the engine facing the other way, there's no way for the input shaft to go into the engine how it's supposed to. So flip this around, at least get it ready to do the first fitting. Alright, so by this point in time, I heard back from my friend, and what he said is you need to check the runout on the input shaft. So what that means is pull the transmission out, get it up on my workbench there, put a dial indicator on the input shaft, and spin the transmission, and just see how much deflection there is in the input shaft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a magnetic base, put it onto the base of the transmission. I'm going to put my dial indicator, and it's going to ride right against the tip of the input shaft. And as I spin the back of the transmission, the input shaft spins, and that little dial indicator goes up and down and reads on a gauge and tells me exactly how out of round it is. And because there's gears inside the transmission, there's a little bit of play. I can have a little bit of flex in there without too much worry, but you know, if it was an excessive amount, that's going to be very, very worrisome. So right there, I've got the tip of the dial indicator at the very end of the input shaft. I was just spinning it with my hand at the front, just to make sure that, you know, the input shaft does in fact spin. Yeah, so just cleaning off the input shaft. I think there was some cardboard or some remnants left on it, and I just marked it with my marker just so I know when I get a full revolution out of it. While spinning it by hand, I thought, you know, my hand is probably introducing some flex in it. Like as I grab it, it's gonna move, and it might give me some erroneous readings. So you can kind of see the dial indicators moving a little bit as I'm spinning the input shaft by hand. I think it's only moving maybe 2,000, which is not much. But again, at some point in time, I think to myself, you know, me actually grabbing and moving the input shaft is probably messing up with the results a little bit. You know, I know it's a lot of me standing around, but this is part of, you know, building a car. It's running into something I don't know, texting some folks that have been doing this stuff a lot longer than I have, getting their opinions, doing some back and forths, and just checking and testing. So you can see right there, I put that little plastic orange plug in the back of the transmission. That came with it when it was shipped. It's splined, and it's just a plastic cap that I can spin with my hand, and that'll allow me to spin the back of the transmission without influencing the input shaft in any way, so I can get a more accurate reading as to what's going on. What I'm doing here is just putting my cell phone in video mode and taking a video as I manually spin it by hand. That way I can go back and look at the video on my phone later just to see how much play there was in the input shaft. And after I did this, you know, the play on the input shaft, as I said, was 1 or 2 thousandths, I think. More than sufficient for putting it in the car and running it. Didn't need to return the transmission. I don't think there was anything broken. I didn't notice any cracks. Everything spun freely enough. As I said, the input shaft was not out of spec at all. So very fortunate that everything worked out. Right, so what do we do now? I think I just grabbed all of the scatter shield hardware. This way I can test mating up the engine to the transmission. Yeah, so you might want to go back and rewatch that. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but as I was lifting up the engine, the whole chain just kind of like snapped and jarred. So gotta be careful when you're working with this stuff, you know, don't be under it. Anything could happen at any time. Yeah, so because the engine hoist just kind of shifted on me, made me think, what the fuck just happened? Um, what I did is I just lowered the transmission down a little bit lower so I don't have to jack the engine up as high. And that way I can test mating this up. It's not like I'm permanently doing this, I just want to test mate it, make sure that the input shaft fits inside the existing pilot bearing. Even though that will be changed before this engine is ever run with this transmission. And I went back and I looked at the original slowed down video, and I'm still not 100% sure what happened. But looking at it, the chain on the right side had tension and the chain on the left side did not. So I think what happened is the chain on the right side slipped on the top ring, which caused the entire engine to swing left until there was tension on both of those chains evenly, and then it was able to just, you know, carry on like normal. As you can see, it takes a little bit of work, but I got the right angle. I got the engine fitted up to the transmission, input shaft went to the pilot bearing, no problem. And now I'm just using some of the hardware just to mock it all up. This is an aftermarket bell housing with a, you know, transmission that's not for this car, so I just want to make sure all the bolt holes line up, everything fits as I expect. That is a 5-liter to t56 Magnum bell housing or scatter shield, so I'm not expecting any issues there. But as we've seen, you never know what's going to happen when you mix and match parts like this. So the genius that I am, I was trying to separate the two and forgot that I'd put in that other bolt in there. So struggled a bit, but after I realized I put that bolt in there, and what an idiot I am, able to get the two separated. Crossmember out of the box. That's a Stifler's foxbody t56 crossmember. I think it'll do a couple of the other Tremec transmissions as well. I got the energy transmission mount there. And all of this came from Western Motorsports in Alberta. Super awesome to deal with. There's a couple of guys I dealt with. I think it's Shannon and Joel. When I was chatting with Joel on the phone, I think it's Joel. If your name's not Joel, I'm sorry. But when I was chatting with him on the phone, I asked him, hey, do you guys sell the transmission cross-member bolts? Because somewhere along the lines, I lost the bolts or I sold them with a different cross-member. And he said, oh, you can buy the actual cross-member bolts that have the little shoulder on them, but they're, like 40 or 50 bucks, something ridiculously expensive. Or you can just go to your local hardware store and get, a whatever size bolt it is by whatever length. And that's what we do here. So I said, oh, okay, yeah, cool, no problem. So when I opened up the tranny cross-member box, Joel had thrown in a couple of nuts and bolts. The proper size bolts for the tranny cross-member and the foxbody. I thought it was amazing. Like probably $2 or $3 worth of nuts and bolts, and it made it so I didn't have to go out and get it. It was just amazing customer service, and a huge shout out to the guys over at WMS Racing. Super awesome to deal with, and I will continue to deal with them for my foxbody needs. Right now I'm just getting the transmission bushing mounted to the transmission just to make sure the bolts that I got are right, all the bolt holes line up correctly. No problem so far. It looks like the bolts that were sent with it were too short, so I just had to grab a couple of bolts that were longer to go with it. So yeah, you can see in the box those two long bolts. Those are the bolts I was talking about. So that blue thing right there is my adjustable transmission mount. I'm just throwing some cardboard on it just to kind of protect the transmission a little bit. Protect as much as I can. Got the orientation in the correct way, so input shaft towards the front of the car, output towards the back of the car, and then I just lifted it down onto the tranny jack. That's a security chain. You put it around the transmission, so hopefully when you're moving around it doesn't roll or fall off the jack. That would be pretty terrible. The aluminum case hitting the floor, you're probably going to damage it in some way, so I definitely don't want it falling off. Now I need to slide it under the car, but as you can see, the shifter is getting in the way of that. So, I'm trying to see if I can slide it through the front, but it looks like there's just not enough clearance. I need to jack the car up a little bit, but as it looks, I'm pretty maxed out on the side with that jack. So I just went and jacked up the rear end. Made sure that the front jacks are in place, because that driver's side front one does like to slide back and forth, mainly because it's not, the car's not resting on it. It's so stiff that it only needs 3 jack stands. And as you can see, I'm taking off the shifter from this transmission. The shifter has some black silicone, which is kind of making it stick to the transmission. So I want to do my best not to damage the case in any way. And because, you know, I'm still grinding and cutting and doing a bunch of work, I'm just putting this paper over the transmission hole, or the shifter hole, because the last thing I want to do is get a bunch of dirt and contaminants in there. Alright, so I was able to slide the transmission in and under the car. As you can see, it's sitting more or less in the tranny tunnel. It's kind of tilted to the left, so I'll have to fix that. I just let the rear end of the car back down. I'm making sure my jack stands are in the right place, so I'll adjust as needed. But yeah, the transmission's kind of just sitting more or less where it needs to be now. Doing my best to get you guys a good angle while I work. So I just got the tranny lifted up because what I want to do is I want to test fit the cross member and see how it's fitting inside the car and how it, you know, where it's gonna mount the transmission in the car. And what I just had to do there is those cross member mounts were pretty badly beaten, and what I'm going to end up doing because of how beat up these things are is I will build new ones before I put this car on the road, because these things are just beat to hell, and you know, I don't trust them. So what I'm doing here with the C-clamp and the square tube is the hole, the bolt hole is bent inwards towards where the cross member is going to be. So when I tried to slide the cross member up, it was just getting hung up on the bolt hole. So I use the C-clamp and the square tube to try and bend that up as much as I can and get it out of the way and make it so that I can actually put the cross member in. So just getting that first bolt in, making sure it's nice and tight. Well, not too tight, but tight enough. And now we're going to try and get the other side in. So in this shot here, you can see that the transmission bolt hole is about 1/4 to 1/2 inch off, and that is not a small number. That is a fairly significant amount. What I did is I just covered my pry bar with some paper towels because I don't want to be prying on that brand new cross member and, you know, getting and scratching it or damaging it in any way. So I'm just using this pry bar now just in tape to try and get that moved over. And as you can see, it does not want to move over. It's taking a significant amount of effort just to try and get it in place. You know, now I've got the one side held in with a punch, and I'm fighting on the other side to try and get the bolt hole lined up. And you know, that's a very stiff cross member, and I have a very stiff chassis. So it's just not wanting to move over. No matter how much I tried, I was never able to get it to line up perfectly, and I was putting a lot of force on there. You know, I wasn't happy with how much force I was putting on there because I didn't feel like it should need that much. And if you look at the left side here, just above, it looks like the transmission crossmember mount has actually already popped off from the body. You know, that's just how much abuse this car has seen. So you can also see that the bolt holes are really mangled right now. So what I'm doing is I'm like, okay, well, passenger side looks okay, so I'll put the bolt hole in there. And then, you know, I'll try and move the driver's side around a little bit. So at this point in time, I've had no more luck getting the driver's side bolt in, so I'm just like, what am I gonna do? I have no idea. Obviously the frame is, or the mounts are too narrow for this crossmember to go in, so I gotta do something. So it looks like I'm getting my Dremel out, so I'm probably just going to elongate those holes a bit more since they're already pretty jacked up. I'll just open them up a little bit more. As I said earlier, I'm gonna remake these brackets out of something a bit more sturdy, so that way I don't have any fear of the tranny ripping out, or the tranny mount ripping out. I'll actually be able to have confidence that it's gonna stay in place while I'm going down the road. But for just getting this in and mocking it in, you know, it's no problem to open those bolt holes up and just kind of get this mocked in there. Now that I have the cross member in, I'm just trying to get the transmission kind of in place. As you see, I had to beat up the trans tunnel there just to get some more clearance for the shifter. And you can see right now that the transmission is angled down in the front, and there's a huge gap. So this is going to need to angle up and become more level, and then I'll be able to get the bolts on the cross member into that mount. So I realized that's where those short bolts that I thought go into the mount into the transmission go. They actually go in from the cross member into the mount. And as you can see with those two bolts in there, I can kind of get this a little bit more leveled out and in place. And then I realized with how the transmission's positioned on the jack, I just can't get it leveled out enough. The little screw handle there is going to help me level it out, but I believe the transmission's either too far forward or too far back on the jack, so I just need to adjust its position. Yeah, I'm moving it much more forward now, and that'll allow me to get at that screw and turn it and level it when I get it up in the air. And again, I'm putting that chain on there because I do not want the transmission falling off while I'm dicking around under the car. That would be very bad and potentially very expensive. So make sure you're using all your safety equipment when you're doing this. As you can see, as I'm lifting the transmission, I can now adjust the pitch of it with that little dial there, so I can, you know, get it leveled out properly. I kind of, looking at this now, I think if I ever need to do this again, it might be beneficial to flip the transmission around the other way on this jack and, kind of push it in from the front. That way the angling knob isn't hitting the transmission cross member. The only problem with doing that would be that, I'd have to move around to the front in order to adjust it every time instead of having the controls right where I need it. But I was able to get the transmission in this way, so I don't know. We'll see. I might be better the other way. It might not be. What I'm doing here is I'm just taking a ratchet strap. I'm going from the transmission cross member to, I think I just go to the tubular front end. But what I'm doing is I'm putting that strap under the front of the transmission so that I can just leave this in place overnight without any real fear of it falling forward. I don't trust the jack just on its own to hold it up overnight. And what I just did there is I just, released the tension from the jack so that I can make sure that that strap is in fact holding it up, as I expect. But just for safety, I'm going to leave the strap and the jack under it, so I can leave it for the night and be certain that, it's not going to fall forward and it's not going to hit the ground. I'm not going to damage it. Alright, so now that we have the transmission in, we can start getting ready to put the engine back in, mate it up to the transmission, make sure everything kind of works. So before I do that, I'm just going to clean up the shop a bit. So when you're moving something heavy like an engine, you want to have it kind of as low on the lift as you can. If you have it high up, it's got a greater chance of tipping or going in a direction you're not anticipating. So while you're moving it around, make sure you lower it down, and you only have it high up in the air when you're lifting it into place. If my engine bay were all painted right now, I would definitely have somebody else helping me get this in here. I would also probably have the front engine plate off of the engine, so that way it's not, potentially swinging and hitting all the bars. But since we're still in build stage and nothing's even got primer on it, doesn't matter. I can, scratch up the bars. It's not going to hurt anything. So right now what I'm doing is I'm pulling off that brake caliper, and the reason why I'm doing that, and the rotor, is because how I have the engine hoist coming in from the side, it's so close to this rotor and the caliper that it's actually hitting. So I'm going to pull both of those out because they're brand new, they're expensive, and I don't want to scratch those. So this entire process just takes a lot of time and a lot of, making sure the angles are correct. And like right now I don't even have a clutch installed on the engine or a flywheel, so it's a lot easier. But at the end of the day, you just want to make sure you take your time, go slow. You don't want to damage anything. final assembly, I won't be using, used random nuts and bolts. I'll actually, grab brand new grade 8 hardware where it's not provided, and I'll use, very nice, good stuff. But for just mock-up, I'm okay using, whatever I can find around. The engine mounted to the transmission, I can put the tabs back on for the engine plate in the front, and I'm putting these on the back side of the engine plate. That way, if I ever need to pull the engine, I just undo the 2 bolts and then I can slide the engine forward without having to go up and over these tabs. And now that I have these tabs in, I can actually just take the engine hoist out of there, and the full weight of the engine and transmission will rest on the engine plate and the transmission crossmember now. What I'm doing is I'm just adjusting this. I want the engine as far back in the chassis as I can get it, just for better weight distribution. Just bringing the TIG out so that I can tack those tabs into place on the front tube. I am not welding them in fully at this point, and the only reason why I'm not doing that is I don't know if I need to adjust these later. Maybe I need to move it back a bit more, move it forward. I've got, a little bit of room to play. So for right now, I'm just going to tack them in, and that'll be good enough. Well, looks like we skipped ahead in time a little bit. I got the welder all put away. I'm just going to pull the engine hoist out of there now, since those tabs are tacked in place. I'm pretty confident the engine and tranny aren't going anywhere, so I can just pull the engine hoist leveler out, get that all put away, and I can continue working on whatever I'm going to work on. You can see I just pulled the tranny jack out because I got the transmission cross member in for the tranny. I've got the engine plate in the front. Nothing's moving. Kind of figure now that I've got the engine back in the car, I might as well put the headers back in. That way they're not sitting on the floor, on the bench, or just in the way anywhere. They're on the car, out of the way. I don't have to worry about damaging them. But what I'm finding out right now is with the engine installed, getting that passenger side header on doesn't actually work. I'm putting tape on because I should have done this a long time ago, in all honesty, but I'm doing it now because as I'm trying to install it, the ceramic coating is kind of hitting some of the metal pieces on the K-member and scratching it a little bit, which I don't want to do. They're brand new parts. I want to, destroy them as little as possible, even though over the course of its life, it's going to get scratched, heated up, the coating's going to get worn down, but it's always nice to just keep your parts as new as possible, especially when you're working on it. Luckily this is my car, it's not a customer's car, so scratching the header I'm not that concerned about, but at the same time I don't want to just willfully destroy stuff just for shits and giggles. Like, have respect with your stuff. As you can see, I'm getting the driver's side in, relatively no problem, just drops right in, and yeah. I already know that the passenger side's not going to go in with the engine sitting in the car like it is. So for some reason, I just decided to try again. But obviously, I'm going to have to do it when the engine is a little bit loosened up. Now we're just on to some cleanup, and I'm going to put the caliper and rotor back on that I took off while I was operating the engine lift at the side of the car. Now that cleanup is done, we are going to get ready to start installing the new heater box on this car. My plan is to make this a street car. I want to drive it in the summer when it's plus 32 out, and that means having AC because I'm tired of sweating my balls off in the summer. I want to have this car to have every creature comfort. So that right there is my build binder. I'm putting, all of the various instructions for all the parts that I get as I build the car in there. I've got different sections for different parts of the car. And when I start doing some of the more technical stuff, like torquing up all of the bolts, like right now you just see me throw a bolt in, kind of loosely tighten it up, but once I actually start torquing it all down, I'll make sure I have a bunch of torque sheets for everything, and that'll go in that binder. But for this video, you can see that's my new heater box that I just got from, I want to say it's Classic Auto Air is the company that I went with. There's two of them. And I think I went with classic auto air. The box, they kind of had the box that I wanted. It's going to fit in the space really nicely. And it just seemed like a really good unit overall. Won't know until I test it out, of course. Here we are inside the car. I'm just kind of holding the box in place, just getting an idea as to where I want it to mount and make sure it's not too far to the left, not too far to the right, make sure I have space on the right side for everything that needs to go into that corner, etc. Just the very beginning of this process of getting this installed. So in order to get a fair assessment of where this box is going to be, I need to get the dash in here. I need to know where the glove box is going to sit. I need to make sure that nothing is going to interfere with the heating ducts or anything like that. So I'm just, loosely fitting the dash in the car. You can see at the top of the dash, like it's all broken. This thing's taking a beating. For final build, I'll probably try and find a new dash, one that's not as broken and beaten up. I'm still gonna have to cut it for going around the cage, but yeah, I'd like to get one that's not quite as beat up. Now that I've confirmed dash is not going to get in the way, I can try and figure out where I'm going to place the heater box, how I'm going to mount it, and I'm going to spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how to mount this to the car. It's a big undertaking. Yeah, if I recall correctly, the instructions on the heater box say to mount it directly to the firewall. There's a little bracket that's got 4 holes. The problem with that is my firewall has no flat spots. Like, the entire thing has curves and bumps, and it's just not a good way to mount it. So I just loosely threw in the kick panel just to make sure that when I mount this, it's not in the way of installing the kick panel. I'm also removing the old fuse holder that I had installed in the kick panel. or maybe there wasn't a bracket, maybe I make the bracket, but you can see on the back of the heater box, there's those 4 little nut retainers, and you're just supposed to mount that flush against the firewall. So yeah, this part where I'm just trying to figure out how I'm gonna mount this, because yeah, as I said, there's no flat spot on that firewall, and I really don't want any bolts on the engine compartment side. You know, one of the main things about me smoothing the engine bay is I don't want to show nuts and bolts that I don't have to. So if I had these 4 bolts just sticking from the firewall side into the cabin, you know, it kind of ruined the aesthetics, and it wasn't really what I wanted. What I'm doing is, on that cardboard, I'm just taking some measurements, and I'm trying to figure out where in the car this is going to go. I'm going to go into the car, in and out of the car a bunch of times, just make sure that everything's going to fit the way I think it's going to fit. So yeah, I'm just really racking my brain here trying to figure out how I'm going to get this mounted to the firewall. At this point in time, I don't have a plan. So at this point, I think I figured out a plan. And the way it goes is, if I can't mount this heater box directly to the firewall because I don't want those screws coming through, and there's just nowhere flat enough to mount it, so I'd either have to, or I would have to, cut the firewall and, weld in a new piece that's all flat. I didn't want to do that, so I came up with this idea. Well, if I can't mount to the firewall, what I can do is build a plate that the heater box mounts to, and then mount that to the firewall in some way. So that's what I'm doing here right now with my templating material. I've, roughly traced out the entirety of the heater box on the cardboard, and now I'm just making a sample plate that I'll be able to mount the heater box to. As with all the stuff I do, I doubt myself. I'm thinking, is this actually going to work? How's this going to work? And yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but we're going to try it. It's kind of funny, going through this video, I just saw something that I might be able to do differently that'll make my life a bit easier. But of course I won't know for sure until I actually get into the car and try and do it. But it'd be nice if it did work out that way. As always, just kind of test fit the cardboard template in the car, see if it's going to work as I expect it. So what I'm doing is I'm just pulling out the ducting just to kind of see how it fits onto the heater box, just so I kind of get an understanding of how much space I need around this thing when I have it installed, because I have that dash bar right in the way and I want to make sure that I can get all of the heater ducting, you know, easily up and out of the way of that dash bar and make sure that I'm not hitting anything. I think that's the only large-ish chunk of metal I have kicking around in the shop at the moment. So I kind of decided, well, we'll see if it'll work. And what you can see right now is I'm kind of taking that plastic bag onto the engine because, well, I just want to make sure the bag stays on there while I'm going to be cutting and grinding on metal. Now I remember what I'm building here. So I'm cutting off those little squares because what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld that little square to the firewall, and then I'll have some ready rod coming straight off of it, and that's how I'm going to mount the plate to the car and then mount the heater box to that plate. You'll see it a little bit better as this develops, but that's the general idea of what I'm doing. So that right there is a 3/8 drill bit. I'm going to drill a 3/8 hole right through the center of all of these squares. Just cleaning up the holes from where I drilled a little bit. So that right there is the ready rod that's going to get attached to the middle of the squares. I'll weld it to the plate, and then that'll stick off of the firewall, and then the cardboard template there, if you imagine that's the plate, that will go over top of the ready rod and hold the whole assembly in the car. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to cut the ready rod. I'm going to cut several chunks, and then I can cut them down even shorter after. But this would just be the starting cuts. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to weld all of the ready rod to those squares that I cut out earlier. This right here is going to be kind of the first peek as to how this is going to work. So you can see that flat piece with the ready rod just sits right onto the firewall. I'll weld it on there, and then that big plate will just slide over top of them. And now, as you've seen me do a whole pile before in this series, is I'm going to transfer my template over to my actual material, and I'm going to cut it out. for some test fitting and repositioning of those studs, I guess I'll call them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a chunk of steel that will go across the entirety of the back of the box. Yep, fits pretty darn good if you ask me. So what I'm doing now is I'm building some little ears that I will weld onto that plate, and then those ears are going to bolt into the plate, so that way I can take the heater box off of the plate, but leave the plate in the car, or I can take the entire assembly out. In order to make these ears, I need to go over to my metal brake, put the pieces in, and just give them a quick little 90-degree bend. Yeah, you can kind of see that what I'll end up doing is I'll weld those onto that plates, and then do the same, like do it on both sides, and I just have a couple of ears that I can put some holes in and bolt to the plates that'll be in the car. So what I need to do now is I need to weld those ears to the plate that I just built. Alright, first look at how the whole thing's going to kind of come together. So hopefully now you can understand what I meant by the heater box is going to go on that plate that has the ears and bolt into the plate that'll mount into the car itself. So now what I need to do is I need to put holes in the plate with the ears on it so that I can screw it into the heater box, and then I also need to put some holes in the ears so that I can mount it to the plate. so here we are. We are getting to having this entire thing bolted together, and I can start getting ready to see what it looks like in the car. So as I mentioned earlier, I cut that 3/8 ready rod pretty long because I knew I was going to be able to cut it down later, and that's what I'm running into now. I got to cut it down a little bit. It just flew out of the vise. That was awesome. So I'm going to use my soft jaws to get it in there a bit tighter. I don't want to tighten it down super tight with the steel jaws because I don't want to gall the threads on the ready rod, because I do want to put a nut on there later. So right now what I'm trying to figure out is placing of those studs on the firewall so that I can weld them in. I also want to make sure that I'll be able to get my hands in there, get my hand on the nut when I tighten it down, because if I put them in the wrong place and I can't get at them, there's no point in having it there. I need to be able to fasten it and fasten that plate to the firewall. So what I'm getting set up and ready to do is I want to put some welds on the back of this ready rod, on the back of the plate as well, just to make it as solid as I possibly can. It's a fairly heavy heater box. There's going to be heater hoses, with hot coolant and AC lines running to it. The last thing I want is that thing falling off. It would be very bad if that happens. So you can see at the near the top of the firewall there, that square that's marked off, that's where the first one of these is going to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my grinder with a flat disc, I'm going to clean up the metal, and I'm going to get it ready for welding. You know, this is why we double check. I didn't really like where it was. It was kind of directly in line with where the heater ducts are going to be. So let's move it over to a part of the plate where there's not going to be anything in the way. Very scientific in this shop. Mount it up there with a magnet and then kind of take a Sharpie on the plate and eyeball where I need to drill it out. Since I just did some grinding, I'm not going to be in the car here for a few seconds. Look at that hole right under the dash bar, and you'll see a garbage bag on the other side of that hole. Just keep that in mind. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack this first mount on. Yeah, so what I did there is I just taped up that, I think it's a thermostat wire or something like that, because I don't want to bend it and damage it, so I just taped it. with all things custom, you gotta put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart. It's just a never-ending cycle. Gotta modify that back plate because it's hitting on the trans tunnel right now, so I'm just gonna take a chunk more metal out of it. As you can see on the plate, there's 2 dots on it right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my square and I'm going to draw lines between the 2 dots. And the reason for that is I know that this plate isn't perfectly set left and right in the car. So I heard a great engineer say one time, if you can't make something perfect, make it adjustable. And that's what I'm doing here. By putting those by drilling 2 holes in the plate, and then I'm going to take my angle grinder and I'm going to cut between the 2 holes so that the ready rod can slide left and right and the plate can slide inside the car. I don't believe this is going to be my final iteration of the plate. I'm probably going to do it out of 1/4" aluminum, so this is perfect for my mock-up. And then when I do my final one, I'll be able to mark in the car where it's installed, and then I'll be able to transfer the exact place onto the aluminum plate. Alright, so it looks like that's all we've got for this episode. As I mentioned, keep that garbage bag in mind when you when we watch the next video. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.